This is one of a series of dialogues between J. Krishnamurti, David Bohm, Rupert Sheldrake, and John Hidley. The purpose of these discussions is to explore essential questions about the mind. What is psychological disorder, and what is required for fundamental psychological change? J. Krishnamurti is a religious philosopher, author, and educator who has written and given lectures on these subjects for many years. He has founded elementary and secondary schools in the United States, England, and India. David Bohm is professor of theoretical physics at Birkbeck College, London University in England. He has written numerous books concerning theoretical physics and the nature of consciousness. Professor Bohm and Mr. Krishnamurti have held previous dialogues on many subjects. Rupert Sheldrake is a biologist whose recently published book proposes that learning in some members of a species affects the species as a whole. Dr. Sheldrake is presently consulting plant physiologist to the International Crops Research Institute in Hyderabad, India. John Hidley is a psychiatrist in private practice who has been associated with the Krishnamurti School in Ojai, California for the past 6 years. In the culture, there are conflicting points of view about the proper approach to dealing with one's own or others' psychological problems. And the underlying principles from which these approaches are drawn are in even greater conflict. Without invoking a narrow or specialized point of view, can the mind, the nature of consciousness, its relationship to human suffering, and the potential for change be understood? These are the issues to be explored in these dialogues.
Is disorder the very nature of the self?
Why do you say that? Why do you ask that? Is it the nature of the self?
Isn't the self, the me, the ego,
Yeah.
whatever word we like to use, isn't that divisive? Isn't that exclusive, isolating process, this self-centered activity which causes so much disorder in the world? Isn't that the origin, the beginning of all disorder?
The origin being selfish activity.
Yeah, self-centered activity at all levels of life.
Yes, and certainly that's the way in which the patient comes in. He's concerned about his depression.
Yes.
Or his fear.
His fulfillment, his joy, his suffering, his
Yes.
agony, and so on. It's all self-centered.
Yes.
So I'm asking, if I may, is not the self the beginning of all disorder? The self, I mean, the egotistic attitude towards life, this sense of individual emphasis on the individual, his salvation, his fulfillment, his happiness, his anxiety, and so on and so on.
Well, I don't know that it's the source of the thing. It's certainly the way he experiences it and presents it. He presents it as his.
Yes, but I mean, if you go all over the world, it is the same expression. It is the same way of living.
Uh-huh.
They're all living their own personal lives, unrelated to another. Though they may be married, they may do all kinds of things, but they're really functioning from an isolated center.
And that center, that self,
Yeah.
is the source of the difficulty in the relationship,
In the relationship.
and the difficulty that creates the symptoms.
And I wonder if the psychologists have tackled that problem. That the self is the origin, the beginning of all contradiction, divisive activity, self-centered activity, and so on.
No. I think that the way the psychiatrists and psychologists look at this is that the problem is to have an adequate self.
Adequate self.
Yeah.
Which means what?
Defining
A
normality
self that is functioning
sufficiently.
efficiently.
Yeah.
Which means furthering more misery. won't.
Well, I don't feel that the psychiatrist would necessarily agree with you that, on that last point, that they might feel that a proper or properly organized self could get together with other properly organized selves and make an orderly society.
Yes,
And you're saying, as I understand it, something quite different,
yes.
which is
But
that no self can do it. No structure of the self can make order.
that's right.
Right.
The very nature of the self must intrinsically bring disorder.
Yes, but I'm not sure this will be clear to, how can that be made clear, evident?
Sorry, it seems to me that this is the context is even broader than that of psychology. Because in the world we have all sorts of things which are not human beings with selves. There are animals and plants and all the forces of nature and all the stars and so on. Now we see disorder in nature too. It may not be consciously experienced. And a cat that's suffering, or a lion that's suffering, or a mouse, or even an earthworm that's suffering may not come into a psychiatrist's office and say so. But the fact is that there seems to be disorder and conflict within nature. There are conflicts between forces of nature, of inanimate things, earthquakes and so on. There are conflicts within the animal world. There are even conflicts within the plant world. Plants compete for light, and the bigger ones get higher up in the forest, and the smaller ones get shaded out and die. There's conflict between predators and prey. All animals live on other plants or animals. There's every kind of conflict. There's disease, there's suffering, there's parasites. All these things occur in the natural world. So is the context of psychological suffering and disorder something that's merely something to do with the mind, or is it something to do with the whole of nature, and the fact that the world is full of separate things, and that if we have a world which is full of separate things, and these separate things are all interacting with each other, that there's always going to be conflict in such a world?
I was wondering, is it clear that there is that kind of disorder in nature, or would we say that disorder is only in human consciousness?
Yes.
That is what the phenomena that you have described. Are they actually disorder? That's a question we have to go into. Or what is the difference between the disorder in consciousness and whatever is going on in nature?
I saw the other night on the television a cheetah chasing a deer, killing it. Would you consider that disorder?
Well, I would consider that it involves suffering.
Suffering, yes. So are we saying that it is natural in nature and in human beings to suffer, to go through agonies, to live in disorder?
Yes.
So what do you say to that, sir?
Well, I think that's the way it's looked at by the therapists. To some degree, it's felt that this arises in the course of development, and that some people have it more than others, suffering. Some people are more fortunate in their upbringing, for example, or in their heredity. But it isn't questioned that that may not be necessary in any absolute sense. Well, that's what we're questioning.
That's what I would like to question too.
Yeah.
Dr. Sheldrake says it is accepted. It's like that.
Mm-hmm.
Human condition is to suffer, to struggle, to have anxiety, pain, disorder. That's his condition.
It's certainly necessary to have physical suffering. People get sick, they die. And we're wondering whether or not psychological suffering is analogous to that, or whether there's something intrinsically different about it.
No, sir. I do question seriously whether human beings must inevitably live in this state.
Mm-hmm.
Everlastingly suffering, everlastingly going through this agony of life. Is that necessary? Is it right that they should?
It's certainly not desirable that they should.
No. If we accept that it's inevitable, as many people do, then there is no answer to it.
Mm-hmm. But
is it inevitable?
Well, physical suffering is inevitable.
Yes,
Illness,
but
death.
Yes, sir, the physical suffering is old age,
Yes.
accidents, disease.
Maybe we increase the physical suffering because of our psychological problems.
That's it, that's it. So a mother bearing babies, she goes through terrible time delivering them. Strangely, she forgets that pain. She's the next baby. Another baby. In India, as you know, the mothers have about 7 or 8 children. If they remember the first agony of it, they would never have children. I've talked to several mothers about it. They seem to totally forget it. It's a blank after suffering. So, is there an activity in the psyche that helps the suffering to be wiped away? Recently, personally, I've had an operation, for minor operation. There was plenty of pain, quite a lot. And it went on considerably. It's out of my mind, completely gone. So is it the psychological nourishing of a remembrance of pain, you follow? Which gives us a sense of continuity in pain.
So you're saying that perhaps the physical suffering in the world is not the source of the psychological suffering, but that the psychological suffering is an action of its own.
Yes, that. You've had toothache, I'm sure.
Yes, I've
You've forgotten it. Why? If we accept pain is inevitable, suffering is inevitable, you must continue with it. You must sustain it.
No, we have to accept that it's inevitable that it happens sometimes. But we can forget physical pain. Can we forget the kind of psychological pains caused by natural things like loss, death of people?
Yeah, I will come to that. I come to you. I have a problem with my wife if I'm married. If I'm not, but suppose I'm married. I come because I can't get on with her. And she can't get on with me. And we have a problem, a relationship. I come to you. How will you help me? This is a problem everybody is facing.
Yes.
Either divorce or adjustment. And is that possible when each one wants to fulfill, wants to go his own way, pursue his own desires, his own ambitions, and so on?
You're saying that the problem arises out of the fact that they each have their own interests at heart.
No, it's not interest. It's like, so we are all terribly individualistic.
Yes.
I want my way and my wife wants her way. Deeply.
And we see that our needs are in conflict for some reason.
That's all. Right away you begin. After the first few days or few months of relationship, pleasure and all that soon wears off and we are stuck.
Okay, that's the same problem then with the mother raising this child and making it her toy. Her needs are in conflict with the needs of the child.
And please, perhaps you go on.
No.
The mother, her mother was also like that.
Yeah.
And the whole world is like that, sir. It's not the mother. So when I come to you with my problem, you say it's the mother.
No, I wouldn't say it's...
I object to that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's the mother.
No, I'm just pushing it.
Uh-huh. You're saying that it's a much broader problem than...
Much deeper problem.
Okay.
Then the mother didn't put the baby on the right pot or something. That's
Yeah. Right. That it appears that the needs are in conflict.
No, I wouldn't call needs are in conflict. Basically, they're divisive, self-centered activity.
Mm-hmm.
That inevitably must bring contradiction and, the whole business of relationship and conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Because each one wants his pleasure.
There's self-centered activity on the part of the person who's raising the child or on the part of the person who is in the relationship, married. The child is the victim of that.
The child?
The child is the victim of that.
Of course.
And then grows up to perpetuate it.
And the mother's father and mother's father, they were like that too.
Yes. Now, why does it have to happen that way? Are we saying that's the way it is in nature? Or are we saying that...
No.
Well, I mean, there are certain conflicts in nature. For example, among troops of gorillas or baboons, take baboons, or even chimpanzees. There's a conflict among the males. Often the strongest male wishes to monopolize all the attractive females. Now, some of the younger males want to get in on the act as well. They try going off with these females, and this younger male will fight them and beat them off. So they'll be kept out of this. The selfish activity of this one male keeps most of the females to himself. The same occurs in red deer, where the stag will monopolize the females. Now, these are examples of conflict in the animal kingdom which are quite needless. There'd be enough food for these hens without pecking each other. Now, these are not exceptions. We can find this kind of thing throughout the animal kingdom. So I don't think that the origin of this kind of selfish conflict is something just to do with human societies and the way they're structured. I think we can see in biological nature this kind of thing.
Are you saying that as we are the result of the animal, as we human beings evolved from the animal, we have inherited all those pecking order?
Yes, I think we've inherited a lot of animal tendencies from our animal forebears. And I think that many of these show up in these psychological problems.
Yes, but is it necessary that we should continue that way? We are thoughtful, we are ingenious in our inventions, extraordinarily capable in certain directions. Why should we not also say this, we won't have this? The way we live, let's change it.
Well, we can say that. Many people have said it.
I know many people have said it.
But without very much effect.
Why?
Well, that indeed is a question. Is it that we're so completely trapped in the ancestry of the past?
Or so heavily conditioned that it's impossible to be free?
Well, there are two possible kinds of conditioning. One is the genuine biological conditioning that comes from our animal heritage, which means that we inherit all these tendencies.
Let's accept that.
Now, that is undoubtedly extremely strong and goes right back into our animal past.
Right.
The other kind of conditioning is the kind of argument that I'm putting forward, perhaps. The argument, this has always been so. Human nature is like this. There have always been wars and conflict and all that kind of thing. And therefore there always will be. And that the most we can do is try to minimize these. And that there will always be psychological conflicts within families and between people. And that the most we can do is try and minimize these, or at least make them livable with.
Modify it, but you cannot fundamentally change it.
Yes, I'm saying this is a possible kind of conditioning. The belief that we can't really change it radically is another kind of conditioning. I'm a victim of it myself. So I don't know if it's possible to get out of it.
That's what I want to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's possible to change the human condition
Mm-hmm.
and not accept it. Say, as most philosophers, the existentialists and others say, your human nature is conditioned. You cannot change. You can modify it. You can be less selfish, less painful, psychologically have problems, bear up with pain. Is natural? Is there? We have inherited from the animals. We'll go on like this for the rest of our lives and for the lives to come. Mm-hmm. Not reincarnation, the lives of other people's lives. It'll be our condition, human condition. Do we accept that? Or do we inquire, should we inquire into whether it's possible to change this condition?
Yes, I think we should inquire into that.
If you say it cannot be changed, then the argument is over.
All right, so I'll say that I don't know.
No, not saying.
No, I'd like it to be changed. I deeply want it to be changed. So I think that this question of inquiring into the possibility is extremely important. But one of my points, to go back to the conditioning point, is that a lot of this conditioning is deep in our biological nature. And people who wish to change it merely by changing the structures of society
Oh, I'm not talking, of course.
are operating at too superficial a level.
Like the communists who want to change it.
But the idea that you can do it by just changing the environment is what the communists thought and still think. And in a sense, the experiment has been tried, and we can see the results in various communist countries. And, of course, believers in that would say, well, they haven't tried properly, or they betrayed the revolution, and so on. But nevertheless, the basis of that belief is that the source of all the evils and the problems is in society, and by changing society, man is perfectible.
But society is formed by us.
Yes.
And by us it's going to be changed. So we haven't changed ourselves. We depend on society to change us.
Yes.
And society is what we have made. So we are caught in that trap.
Yes. Exactly. And if we start off with a heritage which is built into us, inherited, which comes from our biological past, and if we start with that, and we start with these societies that also have bad effects, some of them, and to varying degrees, and we just try to change the society, the other part, the inherited part, is still there. And
but cannot those also be transformed? I may have inherited what? Violence from the from the apes and so on, so on. Can't I change that? The inherited biological conditioning, surely that can be transformed.
Well, all societies, surely, seek to transform these biological drives that we have, and all processes of bringing children up in all societies seek to bring those drives within the control of the society. Otherwise, you'd have complete anarchy. However, these drives are always brought within certain social forms, and individual aggression is obviously discouraged in most societies. But can we say, is it really transformed? Doesn't it just come out again in the aggression of the society as a whole, in war and so on? So we can see that these things are transformed by societies, these basic drives that we inherit.